My sister's wedding was the most beautiful event I've ever helped plan. I know that sounds bitter, but I mean it genuinely. The venue was stunning. This converted barn out in Fredericksburg, Virginia, with string lights wrapped around every wooden beam and wildflowers in mason jars on every table. My sister cried when she first walked in for the venue tour. My mother squeezed her hand and said, "This is exactly what you deserve." I was standing 2 feet away holding the folder with all the vendor contracts. My name was on every single one of them. I should back up. My name is Dana. I'm 31 years old. And for most of my adult life, I believed that being reliable was the same thing as being loved. It took me a long time to understand the difference, longer than it should have, but I got there. I grew up in a mid-sized house in Northern Virginia, middle of 3 kids. My older brother moved to Seattle after college and basically disappeared into his own life, which, looking back, was the smartest thing anyone in my family ever did. My younger sister, Blee, was always the one my parents talked about with that particular softness in their voices. The one whose report cards went on the fridge. The one whose soccer games my dad never missed, even when he missed mine. I wasn't invisible exactly. I was just useful. I graduated from James Madison University with a degree in accounting, moved back home at 22 to save money, got a job at a mid-sized firm in Tyson's Corner, and told myself I'd be out on my own in a year. A year turned into 2, 2 turned into 5. And somewhere in there, without any formal conversation or agreement, I became the person who kept the household running. It started small. I covered the internet bill one month when my dad had a slow week at his contracting business. Then I started buying groceries more often than not. Then my mother mentioned the water heater was making a noise, and I looked at her face and just went online and bought a new one. $1,400. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was just helping out. By the time I was 27, I was contributing around $1,800 a month to the household. Not in any formal way. Not rent. Just the accumulation of things that needed handling, and somehow I was always the one who handled them. The Netflix account, the pest control service, the replacement microwave when the old one died, the vet bills for the family dog Pepper, who was technically everyone's dog but who slept in my room every night, and somehow that didn't translate into anyone else covering her heartworm medication. I want to be fair here. My parents weren't monsters. They were just comfortable with the arrangement, comfortable with the assumption that Dana would take care of it. My dad had this phrase he used whenever I brought something up: "You've always been the responsible one." He meant it as a compliment. I received it as a compliment for years. It took me embarrassingly long to realize it was also a cage. Bree, meanwhile, was living the way people live when someone else is quietly absorbing the fiction of adult life. She worked part-time at a yoga studio, took a solo trip to Portugal at 24, got engaged at 26 to a guy named Trevor who wore a lot of fleece and talked about passive income without ever explaining where it came from. She was happy. She was genuinely, radiantly happy. And I didn't resent her for that. I want to be clear about that. I loved my sister. I also noticed things. I noticed that when the furnace needed servicing, no one called Bree. I noticed that when my parents' car insurance was due and money was tight, my mother's eyes went to me, not to her. I noticed that Bree got to be a person in our family while I got to be a resource. The wedding planning started 14 months before the actual wedding. My parents sat me and Bree down in the living room, and my mother had this yellow legal pad with notes on it, and she walked us through what they could contribute. $15,000, which sounds significant, until you start pricing venues in Northern Virginia. Bree had a vision: barn venue, wildflowers, farm-to-table catering, a live band instead of a DJ, a photo booth, custom signage. My mother nodded along to every single item on the list, like it was all perfectly reasonable. Then she looked at me. "We were hoping you might be able to help bridge some of the gap," she said. "You've always been so good with money." I asked how much of a gap we were talking about. She slid the legal pad across the coffee table. The number at the bottom, after the $15,000 parental contribution and Trevor's family's contribution, was $32,000. I should have said no. I know that. I said it to myself approximately 10,000 times in the 2 years since that conversation. I should have said, "I'm glad to contribute a wedding gift. Here's a check for $500 and a set of nice towels. Congratulations." I didn't. I said I'd figure it out. Because I was the responsible one. Because that's what I did. Because somewhere along the way, I had confused being needed with being valued, and I didn't yet understand that those are not the same thing. What followed was 14 months of being the invisible infrastructure of the most beautiful day of my sister's life. I coordinated with the venue. I chased down the caterer when they were slow to confirm the menu. I drove 40 minutes out to Fredericksburg on a Saturday morning to do a walkthrough because my mother said her back was bothering her and Bree had a yoga retreat that weekend. I built the seating chart, not helped build, from scratch in a spreadsheet, because Bree gave me a handwritten list of names and family dynamics and said, "You're so much better at this stuff than I am." I addressed 220 envelopes by hand because my mother said she always imagined handwritten invitations, and I was the one with nice penmanship. I spent one entire Saturday in October at my kitchen table with a calligraphy pen I'd bought specifically for this purpose, writing out names and addresses while Bree was at a wine tasting with her bridesmaids. I was not a bridesmaid. I want to sit with that for a second because I think it's important. I was not in the wedding party. Bree had 4 bridesmaids, 2 college friends, 1 cousin from my dad's side, and a woman she'd known from the yoga studio for 8 months. I was not asked. When I gently raised it, maybe 5 months before the wedding, my mother said, "Oh, you know how Bree is. She wanted to keep it intimate with her close friends and your family, which is different. You'll be right there at the family table. It'll be beautiful." I nodded. I went home and addressed more envelopes. By March, 11 months in, I had contributed just over $28,000. I have receipts. That's not a figure of speech. I actually have receipts. Because I'm an accountant and I keep records of everything, which is a habit that would later turn out to be very useful. The thing that finally cracked something open in me wasn't a big moment. It wasn't a screaming fight or a dramatic confrontation. It was a Tuesday evening, and I know how that sounds, but it genuinely was a Tuesday when I was at my parents' house for dinner, and Bree was showing everyone the wedding hashtag she'd created for Instagram. She'd designed this little card to put on each table with the hashtag and a cute graphic, and she was so proud of it, holding it up to the light. My mother was cooing over it. My dad said, "Bree, this is so creative." Trevor took a photo of it to send to his mom. No one mentioned that I had designed the card. She'd asked me to 3 weeks earlier. Send me a voice memo with what she wanted, and I'd spent an evening mocking it up in Canva. Sent her 4 options. She picked one. That was it. I'm not saying I needed applause. I'm saying I was sitting right there at that table while everyone admired something I made, and I was so entirely invisible in that moment that it felt almost like a physics experiment. Like maybe if I reached out and touched something, my hand would pass through it. I drove home that night and sat in my car in front of my apartment. I had a small 1-bedroom in Fairfax, which I was still paying for on top of everything I was contributing to the wedding, and I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened a spreadsheet. I added up everything. All of it. Not just the wedding, the water heater, the groceries, the vet bills, the internet, the pest control, the microwave, the furnace servicing, which I'd paid for so quietly my parents probably forgot it happened. 8 years of being the responsible one. The number was significant enough that I sat there for a while just looking at it. I want to be honest about what I felt because it wasn't rage, not yet. It was more like clarity. Like when you've been squinting at something for so long that you've stopped noticing you're squinting, and then suddenly you're not, and your eyes adjust, and you can see the actual shape of the thing in front of you. I saw it clearly for the first time. I had been funding other people's lives while putting my own on a shelf. I hadn't taken a real vacation in 4 years. I'd been putting the minimum into my 401k because money was always tight. I'd told myself for years that I'd buy better furniture, eventually, that I'd travel someday, that I'd focus on myself once things settled down. Things were never going to settle down. I was the thing keeping them from settling down. I closed the laptop and I made a decision. I didn't make a scene. I didn't call my mother. I didn't confront Bree. I didn't do any of the things that you do when you've just had a realization and your emotions are close to the surface and you want someone to acknowledge the thing you've been carrying. I had watched enough of those conversations go badly in my family, in other people's families, to know that they rarely end with the acknowledgement you're looking for. They end with defensiveness. With your being so sensitive, with everything we did for you growing up, with 3 days of silence and then a text that says dinner Sunday like nothing happened, and then you show up for dinner and nothing has changed. I wasn't interested in a conversation that changed nothing. I was interested in changing something. So I made a plan instead. The wedding was in 6 weeks. I had already paid for everything that needed upfront payment. There were a few remaining items, the balance due to the catering company, the final payment to the florist, and a contribution to the rehearsal dinner that my mother had mentioned in a casual way that was specifically designed to sound like not a request, while being very much a request. I quietly paid the catering balance and the florist, because those vendors were counting on that money and it wasn't their fault my family had a dynamic. And then I stopped. I opened a savings account at a credit union I'd never used before. I started moving money into it every week. Not conspicuously, just steadily. I researched apartments in Reston, about 20 minutes from where I was. Nicer neighborhood, slightly more expensive, but within reach if I wasn't hemorrhaging money into my family's comfort. I applied for one. I got it. I signed the lease and I didn't tell anyone. I gave my current landlord notice. I arranged for movers. I scheduled everything for the Thursday before the wedding weekend. My parents and Bree were going to be consumed with rehearsal dinner prep and out-of-town guests arriving, which meant no one was going to be stopping by my apartment, which meant I had a clean window. The week before the move, I made a list of everything in my apartment that I had purchased. This was not difficult because, again, I am an accountant and I keep records. The couch, mine. The kitchen table and chairs, mine. The bed frame, mine. The good coffee maker, the stand mixer I'd bought myself for my birthday 2 years ago, the cast iron skillet collection I'd been building since college, the bookshelves, mine. I'd been in this apartment for 3 years, and every single thing in it that wasn't a wall or a floor was something I had bought myself. I also owned several things that were currently in my parents' house. The television in the den, the nice one, the 65-inch that I'd bought when my dad's old set finally gave out. Because he'd looked so sad about missing sports and I'd been in a Costco and it was on sale and I'd called my credit card a present to myself for being the kind of daughter who would do something like that. My mother's KitchenAid mixer, which I had given her for Christmas 2 years ago. The outdoor furniture on the back porch, which I'd replaced the summer before because the old set was rusting and my mother mentioned it 6 times in a week. A very nice lamp in the guest bedroom. The Nespresso machine in the kitchen. I went on the Thursday. My parents were at a welcome dinner for Trevor's family at a restaurant in Arlington, which I'd helped pay for and had not been invited to because it's really just for immediate family, you know how it is. I had a key to the house. I let myself in, and I took my television and the outdoor furniture and the lamp. I left the KitchenAid and the Nespresso because I decided in the moment that they were genuinely used daily and taking them 2 days before the wedding would be cruel in a way that felt disproportionate. I'm not trying to perform magnanimity. I genuinely waited and left them. The outdoor furniture went into my storage unit along with the television until I had space to set things up in the new place. I left my key on the kitchen counter. I moved on Thursday and Friday and it went smoothly. The new apartment had natural light in the morning, which my old place never had, and I stood in the empty living room on Friday afternoon with coffee and thought, very specifically, this is what mine feels like. I sent my mother a text on Saturday morning, the day of the wedding. I told her I wouldn't be at the wedding. I told her I loved her and I loved Bree and I genuinely hoped it was a beautiful day. I told her that I had moved out of my apartment and that I needed some time and space and that my new address was in Reston and I'd share it when I was ready. I kept it short. I did not explain or justify or enumerate. I had written a much longer version of that text, the one with all the numbers and all the years and all the envelopes I'd addressed, and then I deleted it, because that text was for me, not for her. I sent the short version instead. She called 4 times before noon. I didn't answer. Bree called once from what I assumed was a getting ready suite somewhere and I let it ring. I was not trying to ruin the wedding. I want to be very clear about that. I moved on Thursday. I sent the text Saturday morning. The wedding was Saturday afternoon. My absence from the reception was, in the grand scheme of things, the absence of someone who was never visibly present to begin with. I spent the wedding day unpacking. I made coffee in my own kitchen. And I assembled the bookshelves myself. which took longer than expected and involved a vocabulary of frustration I won't reproduce here. And at around 7 in the evening, when I figured the reception was in full swing, I ordered Thai food and ate it on my living room floor because my furniture hadn't fully settled yet, and it felt genuinely like one of the best meals of my life. My mother called again on Sunday. I let it go to voicemail, and the voicemail started with Dana, I don't understand what's happening, and I closed the notification and went for a walk. The full reckoning came the following week. My mother drove to my new apartment. I had eventually texted her the address, not because I wanted a confrontation, but because the alternative was having her involve my dad in trying to locate me, and that felt worse. And she sat across from me at my kitchen table, the one I'd bought myself. In a chair I'd bought myself in an apartment that was entirely and only mine. And she said, "You ruined your sister's wedding." I had prepared for this conversation. Not rehearsed exactly, but thought through. I had decided that I was not going to cry, I was not going to apologize, and I was not going to enumerate. I said, I didn't ruin anything. I missed a party. The venue was booked, the flowers were arranged, the food was paid for. Most of it with my money. She said that wasn't the point. I asked what the point was. She said the point was that family shows up for each other. And I looked at her, my mother, who I love, who made me lunches and drove me to school and taught me how to hem pants, and also somewhere along the way decided that my reliability was a natural resource to be used rather than a quality to be appreciated. And I said, Mom, I showed up for this family for 9 years. I would really like someone to show up for me at some point. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm going to stop waiting for it. She left. It wasn't a movie ending. She didn't cry and hug me and say she understood. She got up, straightened her jacket, and walked out. And I sat at my kitchen table for a while in the quiet of my own apartment and let that be what it was. That was 14 months ago. Bree and Trevor are living in Richmond now, which I know because my mother told me when we eventually re-established something cautious and partial that currently looks like a phone call every other Sunday and a birthday text. Bree sent me a note about 3 months after the wedding. A real note on paper, which I appreciated. She said she didn't realize how much I'd been carrying, and that she was sorry she hadn't been the sister I deserved, and that she hoped someday we could figure out what we are to each other. I haven't responded yet. I'm thinking about it. My dad called me on my birthday in November and talked for 22 minutes about nothing in particular, his projects, the weather, a documentary he'd watched about the Grand Canyon, and at the end, right before he hung up, he said, I'm proud of you, you know. I should say that more. I said thank you. It wasn't everything, but it was something. I got a promotion in January. Senior associate, small raise, more responsibility. The good kind. I booked a trip to Portugal for May, 9 days solo. Because I wanted to go since Bree posted her photos from her trip 4 years ago and I'd looked at them on my phone and thought someday. Someday is May 14th. I leave on a Wednesday, which is objectively the best day to start a vacation because the flights are cheaper. And I spent 9 years being the kind of person who knew that and never used it. My apartment has a plant on the windowsill, a pothos, very low maintenance, very hard to kill. I bought it the first week I moved in. I water it every Sunday. It is thriving. Here's what I want to say to anyone who recognizes any part of this. Being the reliable one is not a character flaw. It's actually a gift. But it is a gift that belongs to you, not a tax that other people are entitled to collect. The moment I understood that, everything became very simple. Not easy. Simple. There's a difference. Simple means you can see the shape of the choice clearly, even when the choice is hard. The choice was hard. I made it anyway. I don't regret the money. I genuinely don't. I regret that I confused financial generosity with emotional safety, and I regret that it took me so long to understand they were two completely different things. The money is gone, so is the life that went with it. I have a new one now. It's got a lot more light in the mornings. I've thought a lot about why it took me so long. 9 years is a long time to be slowly drained of something without noticing, and I think the honest answer is that I didn't want to notice. Noticing would have required me to make a choice, and making that choice meant accepting something painful, that the people who loved me had also, without any malice or awareness, been taking from me. Those two things can both be true at the same time. That's the part nobody tells you. What I know now is this. The way you treat yourself is a set of instructions you hand to the people around you. For 9 years, I handed my family a very clear instruction manual. It said, Dana will handle it. Dana doesn't need to be asked twice. Dana's needs are flexible. Her boundaries are suggestions. Her time and money are shared resources available on demand. I wrote that manual. I handed it out. I enforced it every single time I said yes when I should have said no, every time I pulled out my credit card in a Costco for a television that wasn't for me, every time I sat at a kitchen table addressing envelopes while someone else was at a wine tasting. The uncomfortable thing about cause and effect is that it doesn't care about your intentions. I didn't intend to teach my family to overlook me. I was just trying to be good, trying to be useful, trying to earn a version of love that I thought looked like being needed. But the effect was the same regardless of the intention. Actions accumulate, patterns solidify. And one day you're sitting in a parking lot staring at a spreadsheet, and the numbers are telling you something your feelings spent years trying to avoid. Bree isn't a villain in this story. I want to say that clearly. She took what was offered because it was offered, and she was never told there was a cost. My mother isn't a villain either. She ran a household the way she knew how to run it, and I was the most efficient solution to a lot of problems, and she used me the way you use a tool you trust, without thinking much about what the tool might want for itself. That's not cruelty. It's a kind of unconsciousness, and the only cure for it is someone deciding to become visible. That's what I did the day I moved out. I didn't blow anything up. I didn't send the long text with all the numbers. I just became visible. I said with my actions, louder than any confrontation could have managed, I am a person, not a function. My resources belong to me. My labor belongs to me. My kindness is a choice I make freely, and I am choosing, going forward, to make it differently. The courage it takes to do that is real. I'm not going to minimize it. There is a specific kind of fear that comes with stopping, with letting the machinery you've been powering just go quiet. Because part of you genuinely doesn't know what you are if you're not the one holding everything together. I had built my identity around being dependable. Stepping out of that felt, at first, like stepping off a ledge. It wasn't. It was stepping onto solid ground. If any part of Dana's story sounds familiar, if you've ever addressed someone else's envelopes, paid for someone else's comfort, been described as the responsible one in a tone that expected your gratitude, then I hope you take one thing from this: reliability is not a debt you owe anyone. Generosity is only generosity when it's freely chosen. And the moment you start keeping score in a spreadsheet at midnight in a parking lot, that's not resentment talking. That's your own intelligence finally getting loud enough to hear. The pothos on my windowsill is doing just fine.